What's that?
Yeah.
Oh, how'd that happen?
They're all on. No.
Okay, are we ready to begin? Yes. Okay. Going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to the May 23rd, 2024 Rental Housing Committee meeting. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video recordings can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to share an audio or video presentation during a Rental Housing Committee meeting should be directed to mvrent@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers line up to speak on an item. Anyone wishing to address the committee in person will complete a green speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called by when it's your turn to speak and the item number on which you would wish to speak. Please complete one speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak and turn them into city staff as soon as possible, but no later than the public comment section for the item you wish to speak. Instructions for addressing the committee virtually can be found on the posted agenda. Recently, regional and local elected and appointed bodies have been subjected to disruptive, racist verbal attacks by anonymous callers during virtual public comments. The City of Mountain View is fully committed to racial, religious, and cultural equity and justice as we strive to create a welcoming, safe, and inclusive community for all. This committee welcomes respectful and non-threatening public comments regarding matters over which the committee has jurisdiction. Comments deemed otherwise pursuant to the Council Code of Conduct and the Government Code may be grounds for immediately terminating a speaker's comment period. And I've got a teleconference notice. Committee member Balch will participate in the meeting by teleconference pursuant to Government Code Section 54953B from the Hilton Garden Inn, Toronto Airport, 3311 Caroga Drive, Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, in the public lounge. The teleconference location will be accessible to the public, and the agenda for the meeting will be posted at that location pursuant to Government Code Section 54953B3. Members of the public have the opportunity to address the legislative body at this location. All right. The meeting is called to order at 7:06. At this, the time on this is off. Okay. All right. At 7:03, and we'll now take roll.
All committee members are present with the exception of committee member Balch attending remotely and committee member Rosas, who is absent.
Thank you. All right, we will now hear from the City Attorney, Jennifer Logue. Thank you for joining. Why does it say thank you? Thank you for joining us. Hi.
Hi, good evening. So as the chair just indicated, the City Attorney, Jennifer Logue, is here, and we thought it would be a good opportunity for her to introduce herself to you, although she's not new anymore. And then also just discuss a little bit about how we work with the City Attorney's office. So, Jennifer?
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Logue. I'm the City Attorney for the City of Mountain View, and I've been with the City of Mountain View a little bit over 2 years now. I believe your faces all look familiar to me. A couple of you I know quite well from City Council meetings. I'm very happy to be here this evening to talk to you briefly about how the City Attorney's Office works with Karen and how we are here to assist you if you need assistance from the City Attorney's Office. So just to provide a little bit of background, as you know, within the charter, the body is created by charter, and in section 1709, it talks about your powers and duties, and within that section, it talks about the role of the City Attorney's Office. And it says that you are an independent but integral part of the city, and that you may request assistance from the City Attorney's Office. And then I shall provide, or the City Attorney's Office shall provide assistance as requested in accordance with Charter Section 711. And so what the City Attorney's Office did some time ago is hire outside counsel to provide regular legal assistance to you, and that's Karen. And so she is essentially an arm of the City Attorney's Office. And then if, however, an issue arises where you do need to coordinate internally with the city, so say you want to bring something to City Council, get on a City Council agenda, or we need to talk about an interpretation of one of the provisions of the charter section that created this body, and you want to ensure that, whatever the interpretation is, it's an interpretation that is going to be uniform, right? Then you would work with Anki and you would work with Karen, and then they would come to me, and they would either work with me or another attorney in the office so that we could work collaboratively to come up with one response. So say you asked for a request, legal interpretation, we would come up with one response, a memo or something that answered your question. And so we would work collaboratively on something like that. We would also work collaboratively on getting you on, say, getting an item on the city council agenda if you wanted to take it with, a recommendation or advice or something like that. So we're a team and here to support.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Don't believe this is an item that requires public comment, but I'm sure council would advise.
Well, it is an item on the agenda, so if there is public comment, you should take it.
If anyone would like to provide comment, please raise your hand. All right. Any questions from the committee? No. All right. Well, thank you. I look forward to continuing to work with you. Oh, wait.
So, the one,
You didn't hit the button. Okay. The chair recognizes Edie.
thank you. The one question I have is, just to understand better, does the Rental Housing Committee hire Karen, or does the city attorney's office?
This is where it gets a little hybrid. So you approve our contract, and you selected, the Rental Housing Committee selected us when there was an RFP several years ago. But our contract is through the city attorney's office. So this is part of the independent but integral. When the RHC was established, you made a decision to be part of the city. And as part of that, we established this legal arrangement where we work through the city attorney's office, but you have the ability to select your counsel.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was nice meeting all of you.
All right. I think we will move on to the consent calendar. So on tonight's consent, these items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the committee wishes to remove an item for discussion. The purpose of the consent calendar is for the committee to efficiently and quickly consider routine or administrative business items with one motion. Public comment will occur after the discussion. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you would like to speak on this item during public comment, or raise your hand if you're watching virtually. Would any member of the committee like to pull an item? All right. Seeing no public comment. Let's see. So I'll now bring the item back for committee action. A motion to approve the consent calendar should include reading the title of the agenda item. So, motion made by Robert.
Yeah, I'm making a motion to approve the consent calendar, but where is it that, where do I read the stuff? Okay.
Just the titles.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I make a motion to approve the consent calendar, in particular, items 4.1, minutes for the April 25, 2024 Rental Housing Committee meeting, the 4.2, Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act and Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance financial expenditures for fiscal year 2023-24 through March 31st, 2024. And item 4.3, Rent Stabilization Division fiscal year 2023 to 24, report through March 31, 2024.
All right, thank you. Motion made by Committee Member Cox and seconded by Vice Chair Ma.
Oh, we can do it. It has the vote then.
Yes, you do need to do a roll call vote because
For Committee Member Balch. Yeah.
Balch is
All right. so-
remote and can't participate in the voting system.
All right, can we please do a roll call vote?
Committee Member Balch,
Yes, approved.
thank you. Committee Member Keating,
Yes.
Committee Member Cox,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ma,
Yes.
and Chair Brown.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Excellent. All right, we will now open the meeting for oral communication from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Bless you. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on non-agenda items? If you would like to speak on this item in person, please submit a speaker card to city staff now. In-person public comments will be called to speak first. Any member of the public wishing to provide a virtual comment on this item, please click the raised hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. All right. Seeing no speakers, we'll move on to new business. Item 6.1, fiscal year 2024-25 recommended budgets for the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act and Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you know you would like to speak on this item during public comment. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Brown, and good evening, committee members. Item 6.1 is a presentation on the recommended budget for fiscal year 2024-25 for both the rent stabilization programs, the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act, as well as the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance budget. This will also propose the annual fees for both programs. So the purpose of this evening's presentation is to provide an opportunity for the committee to review and provide feedback on the fiscal year 2024-25 recommended budgets and the fees for the administration of the programs mentioned previously. A little bit of background on this: the RHC has authority to implement the CSFRA and the MHRSO. The key part of the key powers and duties of the RHC related to the budget are outlined in sections of the CSFRA and the MHRSO. The first is to establish a budget for the reasonable and necessary implementation of the provisions of the CSFRA and MHRSO, including without limitation the hiring of necessary staff, and to charge fees as set forth in an amount sufficient to support the budget, and to finance the committee's reasonable and necessary expenses, including without limitation, engaging any staff as necessary to ensure implementation of the MHRSO by charging park owners an annual space rental fee in amounts deemed reasonable by the committee in accordance with applicable law. The committee is also empowered to request and receive funding when and if necessary from any available source, including the city, for the committee's reasonable and necessary expenses. And while this references the MHRSO explicitly, the similar language can be found in CSFRA section 1709J. So a little bit of information on the actual division here. We are in our 8th year of operation for the division. That's 8 years of CSFRA specific policy and 3 years of MHRSO specific policy. And over this time, the RHC has established policies, regulations, and procedures for the effective implementation of both rent stabilization programs. I'd like to share some highlights of recent and ongoing efforts. One is the implementation of the Housing Help Center. This has been an ongoing portion of our programming since COVID kind of went into effect, and has transitioned and grown more robust over time to provide a critical support to both landlords and tenants. We now have 2 housing help centers that we hold every month, twice a month, one for landlords and one for tenants, and both are very highly attended. We also have a robust and ongoing outreach and education program for the community. It's really important that we're able to provide as much outreach and information as possible, because without that, no one knows what is actually happening with the law. In fiscal year 2022-23 and fiscal year 2023-24, the Rental Housing Committee adopted compliance and enforcement regulations that have helped to establish late fees for the non-payment of annual fees and the failure to timely register rent stabilized properties. And in December of 2023, the committee adopted utility charges regulations that clarify the definition of rent. And this also triggers the implementation of a one-time utility adjustment petition process, which is in progress. These actions have significantly increased compliance with and the efficacy of the rent stabilization programs, as well as the utilization of the programs by both landlords and tenants. And I'd like to also share some information about the efficacy of the program and these new requirements. So compliance with registration and fee payments, as we've discussed before, has increased significantly in fiscal year 2023-24 due to the requirements for enforcement and compliance and the outreach associated with that. We're projecting that that trend will continue in 2024-25 when we are well ahead of our registration numbers from this time last year. We've also seen an increase in petitions filed by tenants over the past 2 years, with this current fiscal year, 2023-24, petition volume already surpassing the volume of petitions filed in fiscal year 2022-23. And if you remember from prior presentations, the petition numbers from last year were significantly above anything that we had seen before. So this year, I think we're projected to hit probably about 80 petitions, which is quite a bit more than our average, which used to be about 16. And it's anticipated that this will continue in the new fiscal year. We've also received an increase in requests for assistance and inquiries and support overall. The division so far has received on average 290 requests for assistance per month in fiscal year 2023-24, which is an 18% increase from fiscal year 2022-23. And we do strive to provide clear, consistent, and exceptional customer service and to develop trust with landlords, tenants, and the overall community. So implementation of these RHC adopted policies, regulations, and procedures comprise a key component of staff workload. We are developing and updating the online portal for property registration, fee payment processing, filing of petitions, and uploading of required notices, establishing new protocols for monitoring and compliance, developing extensive enforcement processes, coordinating with the city's financial and administrative services department, and as mentioned previously, educating the community. Adopting these program requirements, as noted in the presentations related to the adoption of regulations, requires additional staff capacity, including temporary, hourly, and/or permanent staff. And we continuously evaluate and recommend effective and efficient administration methods. We have partnered with outside organizations like the Community Services Agency of Mountain View and Los Altos, otherwise known as CSA, Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto, CLESPA, and Project Sentinel to assist with program implementation and support landlords and tenants. This increases our division's capacity to serve the community in a way that is low to no cost to the division and free to the community. We have also, for the past quite a few years, utilized salary savings due to underfilled positions and vacancies, which has helped to offset operating costs and keep annual fees as low as possible. So I'm going to start going into the actual budgets now. The first that we will talk about is the CSFRA budget for the coming fiscal year. So everything that we are discussing for the most part will be for the recommended budget for fiscal year 2024-25. For this coming fiscal year, we have key expenditures, and they're broken into two categories, which is how you'll see them throughout the presentation this evening. We have our total operating budget of $2.3 million with operating expenses at $2.13 million, and this covers things like staffing for the administration of the CSFRA, general operating costs, including education, outreach, and communications, as well as costs associated with RHC meetings and office expenses, third-party professional services, such as our legal counsel and hearing officer support through Project Sentinel, information technology to facilitate monitoring, compliance, and implementation of CSFRA requirements, capital outlay for the development of the online portal. And then we also see this next group, which is the city administration and interfund transfers at $219,000. This is overhead costs to pay for services and infrastructure that the city provides to operate the rent stabilization programs, as well as self-insurance, also known as general liability insurance, the compensated absences reserve, and equipment replacement reserve funding. So the fiscal year 2023 estimated actuals that you see here, revenues are estimated to be $1.5 million, which is about $190,000 less than the adopted budget. However, this is offset by total operating expenditures that are estimated to be $1.5 million, or about $370,000 less than the adopted budget. Lower expenditures are a result of an underfilled position, staff time charged to other funding sources for other rent stabilization division programs, such as the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance, lower than anticipated legal services and litigation expenditures, and the online portal costs not completely being spent. Therefore, the estimated ending balance for this fiscal year is estimated to be higher than originally anticipated, at $988,000 instead of $732,000, which is approximately $256,000 more than the adopted budget. So the recommended budget for fiscal year 2024-25 proposes additional funding for staffing to implement RHC adopted requirements, a reduction of general operating costs and professional services expenditures, which offsets a portion of the increased costs associated with the proposed funding for staffing, and increased efficiencies with administering the rent stabilization program, which also helps reduce operating costs. We want to note that salary savings due to underfilled positions and vacancies helped actual expenditures come in lower in the adopted amounts, which in turn help keep annual fees lower. But because positions are filled, the salary savings will not be available to the same extent that it was in the past to offset operating costs and provide a moderating effect on the annual fee levels going forward. And here's a table of the differences between the adopted budget for fiscal year 2023-24, the estimated actuals for fiscal year 2023-24, and the recommended budget for 2024-25. And then you see in that last column there, the difference between fiscal year 2023-24's adopted budget and the recommended budget for fiscal year 2024-25. So I'm just going to give you a moment to take that all in, and then we'll go into breaking down the budget a little bit further. The following components of the expenditures in fiscal year 2024-25 for the recommended budget of $2.3 million are as follows. You'll see it here. We have those same categories that I mentioned in the key expenditures overview: staffing, general operating expenditures, third-party professional services, information technology, capital outlay, city administration, and those interfund transfers that I mentioned. So we're going to take a look at the recommended budget for operating expenses first. And the first portion of this is staffing at $1.5 million. This covers 7 full-time equivalent staff positions, 1 division manager, 2 senior management analysts, which is consists of an existing position and 1 new position that we will speak about tonight. 2 analyst 1-2s, 1 senior administrative assistant. This position is currently underfilled as an office assistant, so we will continue to have some salary savings there. We also have 1 outreach specialist, plus we utilize temporary and hourly personnel to assist with the processing. We proposed utilizing temporary and hourly personnel to assist with the processing of the one-time utility adjustment petitions, and funding for interpretation and translation staff from the city's multicultural engagement program, who are actually here tonight helping with item 6.2. So for the new position request, we are requesting a senior management analyst position. The RHC has adopted several key policies in fiscal year 2022-23 and fiscal year 23-24 for CSFRA and MHRSO covered rental units that requires a new work unit, regulations, compliance, and enforcement to handle the workload. And this has, which has and will continue to increase significantly, both in volume and complexity. The new work unit needs to be managed by a higher level staff at the senior management analyst level. The senior management analyst is a working manager position that will supervise staff as well as take on a significant workload. And you can see a lot of the key elements here. I'm not going to read all of them to you this evening, but I do want to focus on the fact that they will be designing, developing, implementing, and managing complex policies and procedures related to the registration, compliance, and enforcement program, designing and conducting comprehensive data analysis services, and establishing qualitative and quantitative performance measures to assess feasibility, effectiveness, and other aspects of program policies and procedures. They will support RHC meetings through city clerk-like duties. And also I want to highlight that they provide cross-departmental assistance for special projects and programs such as the local and statewide tenant relocation assistance laws. And the estimated cost for staffing represents a $321,000 increase over the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. The next up is general operating expenses at $117,000. This includes areas of expenditures related to office operations, such as the cost of materials, communications, and outreach, and education efforts, and preparation for and staffing of RHC meetings. Examples of items include development of printing, mailing, and postage of outreach materials like newsletters, postcards, and flyers, the mailing of our compliance letters, informational packets, informational materials being printed and distributed, such as the flyers, handouts, annual reports, and resource guides that we are well known for. It also provides for the noticing for workshops, events, and educational opportunities. We send these out a lot of times in postcard format since it's highly cost effective. And this section also has funding for staff training and development. Next up is third-party professional services. And I want to mention that the general operating expenses are $57,500 less than the amount in the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. Next up is the recommended budget for third-party professional services at $424,000. We have legal and litigation services that are broken into two categories. Legal services of $150,000. Currently, the RHC retains outside legal counsel to provide legal services, including drafting and reviewing agendas and staff memos for RHC meetings, drafting and updating rules and regulations to implement the CSFRA, regular presentations to the RHC regarding agenda items, the reviewing of materials related to the CSFRA, including forms and petitions, providing legal advice, advising on compliance and enforcement, hearing officer training, drafting RHC decisions on appeal petitions, researching and analyzing best practices in other California rent-stabilized cities, and utilizing the findings to inform the development and implementation of effective programs. The recommended amount is $25,000 less than the amount recommended in fiscal year 2023-24's budget. We also have litigation services at $50,000. The recommended budget includes this amount for litigation services to pay legal expenses related to lawsuits. The CSFRA is currently subject to one remaining lawsuit regarding the application of the CSFRA. It is on hold and has resulted from a petition decision affecting two parties who are in mediation. The recommended amount for this budget item maintains the same level of funding as the amount in fiscal year 2023-24's budget. Next up, we have, Project Sentinel. Project Sentinel provides administration of hearing officers and facilitators, as well as the actual facilitators and hearing officers for our petition program. It is broken into three groups. One is the administrative support services that we receive from Project Sentinel. That is line item budgeted at $10,000, which maintains the same level of funding as the prior fiscal year. The next line item is for settlement conference facilitators at $10,000, which also maintains the same level of funding as the prior fiscal year. And then hearing officer services for the hearing and decisions of our petition process. And that is at $160,000 for this coming fiscal year, which is about that $20,000 less than the amount in the budget for the prior fiscal year. We also received tenant relocation support services, and this service provides counseling and process support as well as neutral third-party income eligibility determination for tenant relocation assistance under the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance, as otherwise known as the TREO, and SB 330 related to a landlord's action of withdrawal of units. And this is specifically related to the displacement due to owner move-ins, repairs taking longer than 30 days, and the withdrawal of a unit from the market under CSFRA Section 1709. This is outside of the other work that we do for the implementing the TREO that is not charged to the CSFRA budget. We're recommending a operating expense of $5,000 for this line item, which is $2,500 less than the amount in fiscal year 2023-24's recommended budget and adopted budget. Next up is community services coordination at $34,000. This line item funds community services agency case management services for landlords and tenants to stabilize the community by preventing evictions. CSA staff provide access to all CSA services to prevent homelessness, including financial relief and other needed resources. The recommended amount for this fiscal year is $990 greater than the amount in fiscal year 2023-24 to account for a cost of living adjustment. The next portion of this part of the budget is for translation services. Most of our translation services are captured under personnel line item wages due to the utilization of the city's multicultural engagement program personnel for Spanish, Chinese, or Russian translations of outreach materials, web pages, educational videos, stakeholder meetings, workshops, and rental housing committee meetings, as we have this evening. However, additional translation services may be needed in other languages. And to be able to cover this, the recommended amount is $500 greater than the amount in fiscal year 2023-24's budget to ensure the division is able to provide assistance to community members with translation needs beyond the languages supported by the MEP team. And lastly, for professional services, we have MVCT, which was previously known as KMVT, coming in at there's a typo here, $4,500. MVCT broadcasts the RHC meetings, which can be accessed online on the city's website through Legistar. And the recommended amount is $500 greater than the amount in the adopted fiscal year 2023-24 budget to accommodate costs associated with additional and special meetings. And finally, rounding out the operating expenses portion of our recommended budget is our information technology suggested budget at $46,000 for this year. This includes annual software licenses, including the online portal, and is $7,000 greater than the amount in fiscal year 2023-24 budget to accommodate annual increases in software licensing fees. And then finally, for this section, we have our capital outlay at $48,850. This is a rebudget of the estimated remainder of the 2023-24 budget for the development of the online portal. The implementation of the online portal is progressing with several phases launched, but subsequent phases will not be completed prior to the end of the current fiscal year. Therefore, the remainder is recommended to be rebudgeted for fiscal year 2024-25 and does not impact the fee calculated for the fiscal year. Next up is our final section of the CSFRA budget, which is city administration and interfund transfer expenses. City administration represents the overhead costs to pay for services and infrastructure that the city provides to operate the rent stabilization programs and is based on a 15% standard allocation percentage. The cost covers various services provided by different city departments, including Finance and Administration Services Department, which supports invoice processing, payroll, document processing, purchasing, and contracts processing. Human Resources Department, which provides for the administration of benefits and the recruitment of personnel. Information Technology Department support, which provides for cost and maintenance of the telephone system, computers, website, and other technology. And Facilities, which provides our office space, maintenance and repairs, copier services, and other facility costs. The total amount for this line item is $165,000, and it increased by $9,000 compared to fiscal year 2023-24's adopted budget. And then finally, we have our self-insurance compensated absences reserve and equipment replacement reserve coming in at $54,000. And that is a decrease of $2,100 compared to the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. Next up is our reserves. So starting in fiscal year 2018-19, the RHC established a reserve balance of approximately 20% of operating expenditures. The purpose of the reserve is to cover unanticipated costs that may arise during a fiscal year. If additional costs are incurred or unanticipated expenditures are required mid-year, the reserve would provide funding for these expenditures until the budget and fee can be established in the following fiscal year. To date, the CSFRA program has not used any reserves, and the recommended reserve amount is $470,133, which maintains the 20% requirement. All of this culminates into the annual rental housing fee, which you can see here is displayed by fiscal year, and this year we're proposing a fee of $120 to be able to cover the expenses of the program. And this is how we get to that fee. I'll give you just one moment to look at this, and then we'll move on to the MHRSO budget. So I do want to mention, just remind everyone that the CSFRA is a 100% cost recovery program fully paid for by the rental housing fee. Okay, we made it through the CSFRA budget, and we're going to go through and do the same general concept for the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance. For this program, we have a total operating budget of $320,000, and you'll see it's broken up into those same two categories: operating expenses at $284,000, which includes staffing, general operating costs, third-party professional services, and information technology. There is no capital outlay for the operating expenses for the MHRSO. And then we have the city administration and interfund transfer line item at $36,000. This is again that whole percent allocation at 15% and is broken into those two categories. So the estimated actuals for 2023-24 are estimated to be $346,000, which is about $4,200 less than the adopted budget. This is due to the a reduction in interest earnings compared to the adopted budget for the estimated actuals of about the amount that you see on the screen, excuse me. Otherwise, we have recovered 100% space rental fee recovery. The total operating expenditures are estimated to be $257,500, which is about $89,000 less than the adopted budget, and this is due to lower than estimated expenditures. The fiscal year 2024-25 recommended budget revenues are recommended lower compared to fiscal year 2023-24 adopted budget by about $27,000 due to lower estimated rental space fees, which is due to the recommended expenditures for fiscal year 2024-25 being $27,000 less than the amount in the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. And it's expected that the implementation and administration of the MHRSO by RHC and staff will continue to provide efficiency and efficacies due to the experience gained with the CSFRA. And here is, it's all broken down into a table. So I'll give you one moment to sit with the table that you see there. And then we will move on. Okay, so here again is that recommended budget in totality of $320,000. The following estimates are deemed necessary to fund the MHRSO implementation work through the fiscal year 2024-25. And you can see these categories are similar to what we had before with no capital outlay for the MHRSO. So broken up into those two groups, operating expenses and city administration and interfund transfers. We'll focus on operating expenses first. And we have staffing, general operating expenses, third-party professional services, and information technology. So first, we'll take a look at staffing. We have one FTE full-time equivalent staff position for this program, and that is filled at an analyst 1-2 level. And there's also funding requested for interpretation and translation staff from the city's multicultural engagement program. Next up, we have our general operating expenses at $18,000. And just like the CSFRA, this covers office operations and outreach materials and supplies and staff training and development. And then finally, one of the last major categories is for third-party professional services at $83,000. We have legal and litigation services, which for this particular program are grouped together into one line item at $65,000. And just like with the CSFRA, the RHC retains outside legal counsel to provide legal services, including the drafting and reviewing of agendas and staff memos for the RHC meetings, drafting and updating rules and regulations to implement the MHRSO, regular presentations to the RHC regarding agenda items, et cetera, just the same as what they provide for the CSFRA. And also like the CSFRA, a yearly amount is recommended to be incorporated into this line item for potential MHRSO litigation. There are no current lawsuits pending for mobile home parks. And the fiscal year 2024-25 recommended budget is combines the litigation line item with legal services and is $25,000 less than the amount in the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. Next up, we have Project Sentinel services, which are broken into the same three categories as with the CSFRA, administrative support at $1,000, pre-hearing settlement conference facilitator services at $2,000, and then finally hearing officer services at $15,000. For the settlement conference facilitators, the recommended budget is about $2,000 less than the amount in the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. And for the hearing officer services, the recommended amount is $10,000 less than the amount in the fiscal year 2023-24 budget. And finally, translation services come in at $0 for this amount because of the city's MEP team. Next up is IT, information technology. The recommended budget is $5,000, which covers the annual software license for the online portal. And the recommended amount maintains the same level of funding as the amount in the 2023-24 budget. Next up, we have our second grouping of funding with city administration and interfund transfer expenses at $36,000, approximately. And we'll take a look at the city administration. So this is the same as what you saw for the CSFRA. It's 15% standard allocation percentage, and it covers those same various services from the departments that help our program run, including finance and administrative services, human resources, IT, and facilities. And then finally, we have our city administration interfund transfer expenses related to self-insurance, which is also known as general liability insurance, and the equipment replacement reserve at $8,500. And I do want to mention that that amount increased by 90% compared to fiscal year 2023-24. And for the city administration, it's about $560 more than it was last year. For reserves, the recommended reserve amount is $63,900, which establishes for the first time the full 20% requirement. And again, the purpose of the reserve is to cover any unanticipated costs that may arise during the fiscal year. We also have here our annual space rental fee by fiscal year, just like you saw for the CSFRA, and the proposed fee of $285 for this fiscal year, which is determined by this calculation that you see here. As for fiscal impact, there is no fiscal impact to review and discuss the budget. The adoption of the budget for both programs is scheduled for the RHC's next meeting on June 13th, 2024. This is a special meeting and will be held at 7 p.m., just like our regular meetings. Both rent stabilization programs, as a reminder, are 100% cost recovery and fully funded by the fees. And this concludes staff presentation. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, we are now on to the questions from the committee. Committee Member Cox.
Yeah, just a few questions. So when you have the outreach meetings to the landlords and tenants, are those on Zoom or they're in person or hybrid or what?
Sure. We hold them in a variety of ways. So they are hybrid for some workshops and meetings. Sometimes they are primarily held through Zoom, and other times they are in person. So it depends on the group of people that we are hoping to reach. And for example, when we give 2 annual biannual, I suppose, presentations to targeted towards seniors specifically, and those are held at the senior center, and they are only provided in person. Mm-hmm. For landlords and property owners, we found that holding the bulk of our workshops and meetings online through Zoom is most effective for them. So we try to do that specifically. And then for tenants, and if we're holding just general workshops for the public, those are typically hybrid. And they're all held at different times of day based on what has been told to us or what we have experienced as being best for that targeted audience.
So like for the landlord and tenant ones, how frequently was that again? Like, did you say twice a year or?
No, so that's just the one that we do that's targeted towards seniors is twice a year. We hold workshops typically, gosh, I think our calendar is very heavy. Right now it's averaging twice a month. And then when we have special items, such as the one-time utility petition process, that is on top of our normal workshop schedule. Plus, we have special ones related to registration that are added even on top of our already heavy workshop schedule. We also have the Housing Help Center, which is what I mentioned earlier, which is held twice a month, both in person and virtually for both landlords and tenants. We talk about that one a lot. Property owners and landlords have a landlord one from 1 to 3 on the first and third Thursday of the month, so they can come live into the office and also receive help virtually. And then tenants come to the 6 to 8 p.m. one that we have every first and third Thursday as well. And that is virtual and online.
So, I mean,
virtual and in person, excuse me.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that, you know, I mean, if the ordinary outreach meetings are just on general topics, whereas you have specific ones for things like when you're rolling off something new, like, you know, the one-time utility thing. Is that right?
We have different, I can share at the next committee meeting the workshop schedule for fiscal year 2024-25. We have a bunch of different topics that we present on. We have our general rent stabilization workshop that's coming up in June. We have ones that are focused on giving rent increases. How do you give rent increases lawfully? We have workshops that are focused on petitioning, tenant petitions and landlord petitions. We give workshops on habitability and maintenance. What does that look like? How do you maintain a habitable premise? We have workshops on how to have difficult conversations with your property owner or with your tenant. financial literacy, kind of run the gamut of providing support for our tenants and property owners. We also have ones that are specifically targeted toward realtors and small property / new owners. We just held that one earlier this month. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that was still this month. And they're all well attended.
Okay. Do you ever give a survey after this is done about frequency?
Frequency, we don't give a survey about frequency. We do give surveys about customers, feedback on the actual workshop. So.
Okay. And let's see, you have, so for the CSFRA, you said that this year you're looking at 7 full-time positions. What was
Correct.
it? What was it last year?
6.
Okay. And,
So that's the new senior management analyst position request.
okay. And then you said that like the rolling out of the one-time utility thing, that's going to be handled by, not by staff, but by, contractors. Is that right?
We'll have, our staff will also be working on this. It's very labor intensive, but we will have temporary or hourly staff, not necessarily contract employees, but temporary employees to assist in that.
Okay, and then one other question. I mean, I put in a question about, why the increase is coming this year relative to last year. It was an 11% increase. And you, one of the mentions was that, rolling out the new compliance regulations to enforce compliance is one of the things that is taking more staff time. So I have that right?
That's correct. It's very, very time intensive. It has proven to be quite time intensive, including all of the financial tracking that we're doing, the processing of invoices, all of that work around that portion of the regulations.
Okay. Do you anticipate that to be an ongoing expense, or there's a large initial expense and it's decreasing later?
There will continue to be a need for what would be essentially a financial analyst.
Okay. All right. And the other thing that you mentioned in your presentation here is that petition numbers are up, right? And so that requires more staff time, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
They're up significantly.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
committee member.
Thank you. And then real quick about the workshops, if someone is not able to make the workshops, are they available to view after the fact on someone's time?
Thank you, Chair Brown. They are available on our website and at the city's YouTube. We also recognizing that even though people might sign up for the workshop, they might not actually be able to attend. We send a follow-up email the next day that includes the PDF of the presentation as well as a link to the YouTube recording of the presentation.
Excellent, thank you. Committee Member Balch.
Yes, thank you very much. It looks like, I just wanted to confirm that I'm reading the CSFRA budget summary table. It appears that there is a 43% OPEX increase year over year from 1.48 million to 2.13 million. Is that a correct reading?
I'm just going to go ahead and pull up that table for you.
Thank you.
So you're looking here.
Correct.
So keep in mind that this is the recommended budget compared to the estimated actuals. If we look at the adopted budget compared to the recommended budget, it's $281,000.
Thank you for that. Okay. Just taking note here. I see that, and then you have a slide later on that shows the fluctuating fees from 2017 onward. In 2017, it was $155. It then gradually decreased to $85 in 2020, and then has oscillated in the years since then. I'm just trying to understand whether the numerator is changing. In other words, are CSFRA expense oscillating up and down? Is it the denominator that is changing, where the number of rental units are changing, or is it both?
So that's a great question, Committee Member Balch. There, in past years, we have used the salary savings, as was mentioned before, and lower than estimated expenditures to offset fees. As we get more toward a zero balance budget, the fees will increase because of that. For specifically 2021, we were very mindful of the impacts of COVID on property owners and just on the community in general, and worked to utilize a large portion of the under usage of expenditures from the prior fiscal year budget to make that fee as low as possible for that particular fiscal year. And then to answer your question about the number of units, we do have an adjustment in the number of units for this fiscal year from 14,000, I just want to make sure I get this number correct, 14,950 to 14,429, because of the new systems that we have in place with the online portal, comparing properties to the information we had from previous databases. We were able to determine potential issues that included duplicative properties, demolished units, incorrect addresses, and unit counts. And so we've had some new properties come into our world, and also we were able to remove those duplicative or demolished properties from our total unit count, which is why there is a reduction in the unit number this year. There hasn't been any additional units demolished outside of what we've reported to you all continuously in the quarterly status update reports, but there is a drop of about 525 units this year.
Thank you. So it sounds like then, that both both of those factors that you listed seem to be stabilizing. The unit count is increasingly accurate, so that's the denominator, and then any of the offsets to the costs, those are also settling out as we are getting closer budgets to actuals. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly correct. We now have enough time and understanding of what's going on in this new program world to be able to have more solid estimates than we could at the very beginning when the program rolled out. And you're exactly right. We're stabilizing with the unit count as well. And we have also we're stabilizing our staffing. We have our positions filled, thankfully, at the moment, and that makes a difference, like I said, in the salary savings. And
right. No, thank you. So then the rough calculation I did then over the last 5 years, so basically after the initial decline due to the factors you listed starting in 2020, 2019, if we look at the last 5 years, the average is about $94 and change per year. The last year it went up from 96 to 108. This year, the recommendation is a 120 increase on 108 from the previous year. Do you have a sense, and I'm not asking you to commit into the future, but do you just have a general sense for, given the stabilizing characteristic that you mentioned a moment ago, whether we are more likely to kind of see things start to even out, where we're not going to have some of these bigger oscillations, or is it still too early to tell?
Given the fluctuations in the market in general, and all of the different things that could impact the fee, I think that you're setting all of those aside. I think that your assumptions and your analysis is widely correct, we will start to see those fluctuations stabilize as we stabilize in our expenditures and revenues.
Thanks. And then final question is that when you speak with landlords who are looking for explanations or information about the fees, do they, how often, if at all, do they talk about their own budgeting process? Because, you know, for someone, we're not talking about generally landlords with a single unit. There are multi-unit properties. There may be 20 units, there may be 100 units on a property. So a change in $10 per unit could be thousands of dollars to that landlord. Do they at all talk about their own budgeting process in terms of how they're able to forecast the fluctuating rental housing fees?
I have not spoken with anyone on that specific topic. That has not been brought up to me, but I'm also not the person who fully handles that portion of our programming. Andrea, Kennedy, do you have any insights? Have you heard anything about this or spoken with any property owners who've discussed this with you?
No, they don't really talk to me that much in detail about their budgeting process. They do reach out often to inquire about the amount of the per unit fee so that they can put their budgets together, but that's as far as we are discussing it with them.
Yeah, to add to that, so we're setting the fee now, but the invoicing happens in January of 2025.
Right. And then thank you for that. And just one more question, actually. I have one more. When Committee Member Cox was speaking, the topic came up around what were some of these higher costs due to, and you talked about some of the regulations or policies that we as a committee approved have turned out to be more technical and requiring more staff time, which is understandable.
I would like to clarify that, committee member. Actually, during those initial presentations and adoptions of those regulations, it was flagged that these policies would likely require additional staffing.
Yes, you know, yes, point taken. To that point, is there, to what extent do you believe that in future circumstances, the Rental Housing Committee would be able to get some kind of a rough estimate on the cost of implementation of what we vote on, so that we could say, okay, we want to approve this RUBS policy or another type of policy, and we think doing so might cost X, and then we could evaluate the cost of implementation versus the community benefit. Is that something that you think is plausible, or are the variables too great to provide some kind of an estimate?
That's definitely something that we can look forward to. We can look to in the future to see if that's feasible on our end. I can get back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's all I have tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Vice Chair Ma.
Thank you, Chair. The question I have is regarding the CSFRA fee revenue. So last year, or from the actuals, we were about 10% lower than what we planned on. Is that addressed anywhere else in it, or is it a result of the unit thing that that's already been discussed before?
So you're speaking about the estimated revenues?
Yes.
So part of that is due to the unit count reduction that I just discussed with Committee Member Balch. Another portion of that is there is a change in how revenues are recorded by finance due to the change in how we're billing invoices. And so part of what you're seeing there is something that we won't see in the future, but for this particular snapshot in time makes a difference in how it looks. Those numbers will start to probably right side more completely within the next few months as more of the invoices are fully paid.
Okay, thank you.
Any further committee questions? All right. So we will now take public comment. In-person public comments will be called to speak first. Any member of the public wishing to provide virtual comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will display a countdown timer on the screen. All right, seeing no comments.
I think you're in the wrong.
My apologies. Anil, it's your turn to speak. You'll have 3 minutes.
Just one moment, Anil, before you start. Our timer is frozen.
All right, 1 second.
The timer
All right.
is on.
Anil, feel free to unmute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the unmute button was on a different screen. Thank you. Anil Babar with the California Apartment Association. As was mentioned in the presentation, this is the 8th year of operation for the Rental Housing Committee and for the fees in general. And I think it's time we, for the RHC to really assess independently the effectiveness of its existing operation. We've seen a fee that has ballooned from a low of 85 in 2021 to a proposed 120 in January 2025. Through efficiencies, we should be seeing this fee staying stable or decreasing, but the growth of the amount signals inefficiencies, maybe unnecessary bureaucracy, and a need for better management. The upcoming fiscal year is seeing a decrease of units regulated, as was mentioned in the staff report. If that trend continues, we can only expect this fee to skyrocket to justify the current programs unless an independent audit is conducted. And that trend does continue, hiring additional staff won't be necessary. With an ending balance higher than anticipated, it's all the more reason that we should be surprised that a fee increase is even being recommended. I should also note that your fee levels going up is something that the city of San Jose is also experiencing, and they recognize that there might be a need for an evaluation of their program. So they've actually asked their city auditor to do a independent audit of their program. Now, I'm not sure if the city of Mountain View has their own independent auditor, but if they don't, an outside auditor would be useful in understanding how the fees are being used, where the fees are being used, and whether we can provide more efficiencies in the existing program to either stabilize the fees going forward or bring them down. Frankly, we're concerned about if there are going to be this trend of decreasing units continues, will the fees go down, or will they keep the current level of staffing and resources at their current level, and that will require fees to go up even more? So we ask that an audit be completed to understand where the money is going and if it's being used effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Any further public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the committee for comments and deliberation. Committee Member Cox.
Yes, thank you for bringing this item forward. Just to give a little bit of background on my questions and what motivated them. When I was first appointed to the Rental Housing Committee, I'm also vice chair of the Old Mountain View Neighborhood Association, so I know a lot of people in my neighborhood, both landlords and tenants, and when I would meet somebody, I would always ask, you know, if they're a landlord or a tenant, what is it you're looking for from me? And the tenants pretty much say, make sure you understand the CSFRA and make sure that you hold my landlord to it, because that's what the law says, okay, and that's fair. Landlords, on the other hand, the consistent thing I've gotten back is make sure that whatever we're paying those fees for is justified. So that's the reason for my questions today. So yeah, I was a little bit, whenever I look at a fee that's going up more than inflation, you know, I want to root cause, you know, what is the issue that is pushing those costs up. And in particular, that's the reason I changed my insurance agent this year. But in any case, going back to this point, you know, I hear what's being said, and it's, you know, we do need an additional staff person, and the reason for it, what I'm hearing is, first of all, there are an increasing number of petitions, and secondly, you know, it has to do with compliance. And, you know, compliance has two parts. When I first heard compliance, I said, well, if it's on the issue of paying the fees, then, you know, getting more money might pay for itself. But I think maybe the real problem is you know, we had been so far out of compliance on the registering the units that's the thing that's taking more. And honestly, that is, that goes back to point one with the tenants. I mean, you know, they have, you know, having the units registered is a matter of justice for them. So, I mean, I think both of those are justified, but I also hear what the recent speaker just said, and I want us always to keep a pulse on when we're doing these things as to whether they're justified, and also whether they're a one-time cost or whether they're a recurring cost. And it does seem like we do have some more recurring costs, but I mean, I was pleased to see that, you know, after an initial highest cost per year, that the rates did come down for a while, and I think staff's being conscientious now, and I want to just encourage them to continue to be conscientious, because it would be good if the rates could come down more in the future. So I'm supporting what you have here, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to hear all of it and go through the details. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would suggest in the future is, you know, there's a lot of detail in the documents you sent us, but, you know, sort of a standing on one foot answer at the end of the staff report about, you know, what the main top 3 points are. That would make it easy for a layperson to get at it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Oh, every time. Committee Member Balch.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I also very much appreciate staff's work. There is a lot of time that goes into the planning and the implementation of the CSFRA, and notwithstanding the staff's correct statements that the things the committee has voted on are going to cost, now we're actually seeing the bill, right? So we go to the restaurant, we order some food, and then we're surprised when we see the bill. But nonetheless, it is a high bill. I recalculated the percentages based on the clarification of my questions. So our expenses are increasing apparently 15% budgeted year over year, from 1.85 to 2.13. And then the recommended fee increase is either 11% year over year, 120 on 108, or 22% if we look at the 5-year average. All of these numbers are considerably higher, not only than inflation, but they're even they are a much higher multiple when we look at the allowable rent increases that landlords are able to get under the CSFRA. So there seems to be, from a basic business perspective here, we are holding landlords, you know, we're holding one part of the community to a capped revenue, but we're increasing their costs at multiple times of that cap, of the rate of growth of that cap. Now, the CSFRA may have a valiant reason for that, which is to hold down the cost of rentals for residents. But if we are capping the revenue and we are increasing the cost, it's not the utility company, it's not another thing, we are the ones doing it. That, I think, creates a problem. It creates not only an optical problem in terms of why are we holding different people to different expectations, but it's also a real dollars and cents problem. I mean, ultimately, this does come back to the committee because we are the ones who vote on these policies, and we need to increasingly do so with a mind to the cost of those policies, because budgets are finite, and again, we have to make sure that we're not the ones driving the high cost. There are lots of reasons that there are cost increases in the economy, and now the RHC is another one of those drivers of cost increases. So I am concerned about it. I don't know exactly what to do about it here, because the RHC has already voted on these things, and now staff is being asked to implement what's been acted on. I also understand the staff's gut feeling, and again, not holding anyone to commitments, that that things are going to start to stabilize because we have better forecasting. But the increases in costs directly attributable to the CSFRA in relation to the rental economics that the CSFRA puts on property owners, that's something I think we have to discuss that as a committee and figure something out there, because it's certainly not sustainable long term, and even short term, it just creates a sense of this is okay for us, but not okay for you, and that's a tricky area to go down. So I'm not very comfortable with this just because of that. It doesn't seem equitable, and I have to think about this some more, and I think we all have to think about how can we square this. But again, I appreciate the staff's work. I think you are reflecting the reality of the situation, of what people cost and of what the Rental Housing Committee has voted on. So thank you again for your work.
I also would like to clarify that the fee is lower than the starting fee, which is the best estimate of our expenditures at $155 for that first year there, and lower than the second year. If you look at these 7 years of operations, not including the proposed budget, that would be an average fee of $110. And then if you take out the outlier for the 2020-2021 fee, because it was, purposefully reduced by decisions of the committee and recommendations of staff, that would make the average fee for those 6 years, not including that outlier, $114. So just to clarify a little bit there, it does provide some perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Committee Member Keating.
Thank you. I'd like to comment on the amount of the fee. So it's a little bit of a difference, because we're used to thinking of what is the rent in terms of a monthly rent, but the fee is presented as an annual fee. So I appreciate the round numbers. We're talking about $10 a month, and $10 a month compared to a monthly rent, thousands of dollars of rent, in my opinion, remains quite low. And there are other options for landlords to increase rents. So not every unit is going up by only the AGA. When there's vacancy decontrol, there's I perceive, a strong rental market, and there is an opportunity for a much more significant rent increase in the new rent being charged. And then, of course, finally, another option for a landlord who feels that they are losing ground on their profit is maintenance of net operating income petitions, where they would have to document their excessive growth of expenses versus their growth of revenue. We had prior comments about wanting to know the cost of programs, and I think one other area where I would be curious to know the cost would be the cost of an appeal. Just how many hours that is and how that's billed. It should be, some average should be able to be presented for what it costs when a landlord brings us an appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Member Keating. Do you have any further comments? All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move to agenda item 6.2, proposed amendments to Chapter 13, utility charges of the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act regulations.
I just want to confirm that nobody is proposing any changes to the recommended budget.
I did not hear any recommendations.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Spanish language interpretation was requested for this agenda item. As a reminder to our presenters and speakers, please speak slowly. While presenting, pause after each slide to allow time for the interpretation. We will now hear from the interpreter, Jason Walker.
Good evening. If you need translation in Spanish, please press the interpretation button in Zoom and select the appropriate language to hear the meeting in that language. Muy buenas noches. Si necesita interpretación al español, pulse el botón Interpretación en Zoom y seleccione el idioma adecuado para escuchar la reunión en ese idioma. Gracias.
Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you know you would like to speak on this item during public comment. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair. We can go to the first slide on this item. So the purpose of this item is to review and adopt amendments to CSFRA regulations, Chapter 13, utility charges, clarifying certain aspects of the one-time utility adjustment petition process. Next slide. So on December 18th of this past year, the Rental Housing Committee adopted CSFRA regulations, Chapter 13. One of the main things that Chapter 13 does is clarify that utility charges, including charges for shared or master metered utilities, such as water, sewer, or trash, are rent under the CSFRA, and provides that the cost of these services must be established as part of the initial rental rate for a covered rental unit and specified in the rental agreement at the commencement of each tenancy. Next slide. Oh, thanks. The second thing that the Chapter 13 does is provide for a one-time utility adjustment petition process that would allow landlords who are currently using a ratio utility billing system or RUBS or similarly calculated and billed utility charges to transition from the separately charged utilities to including the utility costs in the rent. And the purpose of this is essentially to bring those landlords who are currently out of compliance with the requirements of the CSFRA as far as the billing of utility charges into compliance with the requirements of the CSFRA. Chapter 13 also establishes the process for submissions and review of that one-time utility adjustment petition. Since the adoption of Chapter 13, staff has hosted informational workshops with stakeholders, gained a better sense of the implementation timeline, and also learned about additional topics that staff is recommending be addressed via the regulation tonight. So getting into the recommended changes, for the purposes of making this conversation easier, we've put up the actual language of each of the proposed changes to Chapter 13. The first one relates or is under Section A1B, which is the section that essentially provides that utility charges are in fact part of rent. The purpose of this section is to provide that while Section A1 does not apply to any individually sub-metered utilities or utilities for which the tenant of a covered rental unit is billed directly by the service provider, a landlord who is exempt under this section is still required to file a one-time utility adjustment petition, explaining the basis of their exemption. So the examples of that would be that the covered rental unit is separately metered, or that they already include utility charges in the rent for the covered rental unit. So essentially the purpose of this is to notify landlords that they need to claim their exemption from this petition process. The second recommended change is to Section B1. This would add an applicability section to the one-time utility adjustment petition process section to make clear that this petition process applies only to utility charges and not to any other fees associated with housing services, such as parking, pet fees, so on and so forth, that are included in the rent for a covered rental unit. So this is just providing a clarification that this process applies only to utility charges. The third recommendation would be to Table 1. This table sets out the steps for calculating the one-time utility adjustment amount. So the first change would be to provide that instead of a landlord providing the utility charges for the 12-month period preceding the submission of their petition, every landlord would just provide the actual amount of the utility charges for the property for the period between July 1, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. So rather than having a rolling timeline based on when landlords are submitting, which would make implementation more complicated, this provides a set specific time period for those calculations, the initial calculation of the total utility charges for the property. This also relates to the additional changes that are made. And in particular, in step 8, staff is recommending that the committee provide a one-time inflationary adjustment to the unadjusted one-time utility adjustment amount in order to account for anticipated increases in the rate of utilities that are provided by the city of Mountain View. So the city has sent out notices informing property owners that their rates will increase beginning after July 1 of 2024. And so staff is providing or recommending that in order to account for those increases, the petition process include a one-time inflationary adjustment upward. The recommended addition of Section B2E, this again is under the one-time utility adjustment petition process, and basically this language would provide that a landlord can choose to impose less than the maximum amount that is authorized by the one-time utility adjustment petition process. And this is solely to inform and authorize landlords to do this in case they do not want to impose the entire amount. Thereafter, we have recommended changes to Table 2. So this is actually something that had been discussed, and as you'll see with the language that's crossed out, it says date to be determined. At the meetings where these regulations were considered and adopted, there was not a great sense of when exactly this process would be able to be launched. Staff now has a better sense of when this process is going to be launched and feels pretty confident that it will be in September of this year. And so there's a recommendation to put in the precise dates for when landlords will need to submit their one-time utility adjustment petition documents based on the size of their property. So the next three changes are all intended to clarify staff's role in the notification process after a landlord has filed a one-time utility adjustment petition, and to maximize the efficiency of the petition process. So the first would provide that if staff determines that the landlord's utility adjustment petition packet is incomplete, the landlord will have to correct that within 15 days after the mailing date of the staff notice of an incomplete utility adjustment petition. You can go to the next slide. The second relates to the service of the utility adjustment petition packet on a tenant. So once staff determines that the packet is complete, staff will notify the landlord that the petition is ready to be served on the tenant, and the landlord will be required to provide a copy of the petition, not including supporting documentation. And the purpose of that is to make sure that confidential or personal identifying information about other units is not provided to each of the tenants in the property, as well as an informational notice form to each unit to which the petition applies, at the address of the affected unit. And then after the petition is served on the tenants, the landlord will need to file a copy of the petition, including a proof of service with the Rent Stabilization Division. Lastly, the Rent Stabilization Division will notify the petitioner and all affected tenants that a utility adjustment petition was filed with the division, and a notice that the petition packet was filed will identify the due date for the submission of a tenant response to the petition. I believe this is the last one, but the purpose of this recommended addition of section B13I is to prohibit the imposition of any previously banked annual general adjustment increases to the one-time utility adjustment amount, because that utility, as we just discussed, that one-time utility adjustment amount staff is recommending should be based on the prior year's actual utility charges plus an inflationary adjustment to account for the upcoming rate increases. And so essentially allowing any previously banked AGAs to be applied would essentially be double counting. And so this section would prohibit that. The landlord can still apply those previously banked AGAs to the physical space rent. And there's an example of what that means in this section to help clarify. So fiscal impact, the recommended changes to the petition process are in part intended to streamline the one-time utility adjustment petition process, which might have a minor positive impact on the Rental Housing Committee budget by increasing efficiency and reducing administrative costs.
And before we take questions from the committee, I would like to just clarify one one section here for the committee. Just get back to it. You'll see here that we've clarified the difference between a filing deadline and a submittal period. So previously we were stating that there needed to be the petition actually served on the tenants and filed with the division by the end of this deadline. And now we are recommending that this has to be submitted to us for that review process before it's served on tenants by this deadline. So when you're looking at this particular section of changes recommended to section B6, what we're saying here is that if essentially in our hypothetical situation, if a property owner waits to the last day of this period, so we'll say February 28th, 2025, to submit to us their petition for review, we have time to review it to say it's complete. It looks like all of the information is here. You're not missing anything. You're now ready to serve this on your tenants. They have that opportunity to then serve it on their tenants. If there is missing information or the petition packet is incomplete, they then have a set time frame to fix it. So these timeframes here are just for the submittal to get it to our office for that initial review process. So I just want to really clarify that and make it extraordinarily clear that that is what is happening there. Thank you, Council.
I think we were just on the recommendation page. I don't know if we want to read it, but it's just to adopt the regulation. So staff's recommendation is to adopt the amendments to CSFRA regulations, chapter 13, utility charges, clarifying certain aspects of the one-time utility adjustment petition process, and we're available to answer questions.
Well, that's a great time to move to questions then. Vice Chair Ma?
Thank you, Chair. My question is regard to a comment we got from an email from Tessa McFarland. Has staff read the email, and does staff have any opinions about the proposed changes they proposed?
If someone wants to take this one.
So that is part of what I was hoping to clarify with the clarification that I just provided regarding this submittal, the difference between what was here and what is being proposed. 15 calendar days is what is applicable in other petition processes. We haven't had any issues with that. And related to the mail and or electronic mail clarification, if we have the email address for the tenants and the property owner, then this will go out through email, of course, and by mail. We'll send both, as we typically do with acceptance or non-acceptance processes. If it is, well, this is actually specifically for the landlord. So if it's going to be only by mail because the property owner does not have email, then we will send it to them by mail. And if not, we will likely send it to them both ways as we typically do. So there should be no issue with them receiving the notification that their utility adjustment petition is incomplete.
Okay, thank you.
Committee Member Balch.
Thank you very much. I have a question regarding the proposed one-time inflationary adjustment for the City of Mountain View utility increases. Electricity rates have increased substantially in recent years, as has been observed and covered quite a bit in the press, and those of us look at our home bills. I just want to understand the logic why does not that logic not transfer over to PG&E for electric rates, or perhaps gas, but I was thinking electric? Is there a different logic, or is there some other rationale at play which distinguishes City of Mountain View versus PG&E?
The
Yeah.
majority of units in Mountain View have PG&E submeters. So they would not be included in our calculation for the one-time utility adjustment petitions. So we're looking specifically, typically at water, sewer, and trash.
So to be clear, PG&E sends bills to those tenants individually. So
yes.
it does not go through the landlord, and so it would not be impacted by this petition process. The tenant just pays whatever they are charged directly from PG&E.
Yes, I do agree with that. Most of the submetering issues or lack thereof are on the water side. But I do remember, though, at a meeting several months ago, we did discuss the general provisions when that was not the case, and we were talking about accounting for costs of common areas. So I mean, I'm just trying to understand if there was a situation, you know, somewhere in the City of Mountain View where, for whatever reason, electricity was also treated the same way as water, that is without a submeter, would the same logic apply, or there's
in that case, it would be rolled into the average. It would be one of the utilities included in the average calculation. That's then compared to the allowances from the Santa Clara County for utilities, and then whichever of those is lower, either the calculation including the common area deduction, all of the different pieces of that calculation that was adopted in December, whichever of those is lower is the amount that then is the unadjusted utility increase amount, and then the rate of inflation would be applied on whichever one of those is lower. So the prior regulations did not account for inflation, did not account for rate increases, did not have anything worked into for that. So we wanted to be able to address that, to acknowledge that those things are occurring, and provide that additional inflationary amount for property owners.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Committee Member Keating.
So in the presentation, there was comment about notifying the tenant, not involving the listing of all the rooms per unit and so on, that detail. But what if would it be difficult, or what does staff think about the possibility of either always or upon request sharing the landlord utility cost with the tenant? Because I don't see a privacy issue. That will
be shared. There are definitely things that will be redacted based on the requirements of the government code, but what does not need to be redacted will not be redacted. So the things that the tenant need to know to be able to determine whether or not their unit is being charged appropriately will not be redacted or removed from the submissions.
So they would have the total number of quote rooms, as we're counting rooms, and the utility bill and the schedule?
Right, that would be on the form. So the form is not going to be redacted, only the supporting documentation. So for instance, if they're claiming there are 5 rooms and a landlord submits pictures to show that there are 5 rooms, we would not want to share the pictures of the 5 rooms, right? Because that would let people know what the inside of everybody's unit looks like in their building. But they will get the petition form which says they're claiming there are 5 rooms in your unit, and so they will know, well, no, actually there's 4 rooms in my unit, or there's so on and so forth.
Thank you.
Or I don't have they're saying that I have submeters and I don't have submeters, or those different things that will really stand out for the tenants.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Any further questions? All right, then we will move to public comment. If for anyone in person, please submit a speaker card. If you're virtual, raise your hand or press *9. We're going to start with Anil.
Thank you. My comments are kind of grouped into either general concerns and then specific concerns with this or the recommendations put forward today. We didn't have an opportunity to review it with staff, and we are still actually conducting some legal review of this, but some kind of high level issues that popped up I just wanted to raised to the committee. One, in the area of general concerns, the regulations state that the adjustment can only be applied at the next rental cycle. Some owners have brought up to me a concern that what happens to those tenancies that have just been renewed prior to the determination of the adjustment amount. They'll have to wait an entire year to implement the petition increase. So I think if we can find a way to allow for property owners to, even if it just started a renewed a tenancy, to allow that increase to be implemented as soon as it's awarded, that would greatly be a help. As far as the specific concerns with this, it's a couple things that popped up when we were just doing our cursory review. We just saw this when it was released last Friday, and so we've been trying to understand the implications of some of these changes. One, in one of the first recommendation number 1, the changes to A.1.b, it requires an owner to file a petition simply to obtain an exemption if their building is sub-metered. Our concern is, and I don't know the petition process. It hasn't been explained yet, but just to prove that you're sub-metered, I don't know, I don't understand why we need to go through the whole petition process. If there might be a simpler way to just provide that proof rather than going through the whole petition process, I think understanding what that petition process is for those owners would be helpful. Recommendation number 6, and this was brought up just a few minutes ago, about the 15 days to respond. I appreciate that attempts will be made to notify owners by email. But again, if the owner is only notified by mail, there is a chance that the mail gets delayed due to the postal service. And if there are a number of incomplete petitions for any particular owner, 15 days to respond to and to go through all those incomplete petitions may not be enough. One comment was made that 15 days is common for other processes in the city. I don't think this is the same kind of system, the same kind of scenario, because I don't think other processes are going to get this level of, or this volume of petitions. And I think that's something to keep in mind, is just the sheer volume. And, increasing it simply to 30 days shouldn't be too much of an ask. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And we will move on to committee comments and deliberation. Does anyone have any comments on this item? There you go. Committee Member Cox.
Not a lot of comments, just I want to thank staff for having gone through this in such, diligence, because, I'm grateful that you went through all of it with the intent and with a positive result of resolving any, questions on clarity of what's going to happen. And I also, in particular, I like the idea that we're giving a specific, beginning date and end date, because that's a lot clearer and easier for people to follow when they're trying to do this. Yeah, I don't know. On the 15 days, I hear that that's reasonable, but I would be willing to extend it if other people thought that was justified. I wouldn't put it for more than 30 days, but other than that, I think everything is in order. And I do like the idea of having everybody file the paperwork, on, you know, even for the exemption, because it's just a matter of completeness, and also for, to give tenants, you know, the right to raise any issues they have with this if they think that that isn't in order. I mean, the amount of information needed for that seems, you know, minimal. So those are my comments.
All right, thank you. Committee Member Keating.
So we're on comments now, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I appreciate the addition of the increase for inflation added to the rents. I think that's appropriate. I think the word exempt is, I'm chewing on that a little bit, but I don't think we need to make any changes. Exempt means that the landlord is not requesting any change, and the landlord is not requesting any rent increase. So requiring that, it doesn't seem like that great a burden. You know, if the landlord fails to comply with that, you know, is there a penalty or not? But I think it would be a nice completion for, and a courtesy to the, you know, rental housing program to go ahead and ask for landlords that are not requesting any one-time utility increase to declare that. Exempt just seems like not the perfect word for that, but decline might be a better word. I decline to ask for any one-time utility increase. And then that would also trigger, I presume, a notice to the tenants. And, you know, so I don't think there's possible upside in that. I wonder if there would be a second to one very minor change in the, I wonder if there would be a second to a minor change, instead of and or by email if requested or if provided, to just strike the and, the or part, and just say and email.
So and email if provided, or if
Mail and email, parentheses, if provided, instead of and or.
I think that there is at least one person who would support that. So, motion to amend?
Yes.
Do you want to hit the button?
Is there a motion on the floor right now?
No, there's not a motion.
So what do
So do you want to do you want to make the initial motion?
Once a motion is made,
And then amend it?
can suggest that as part of the motion, if that's the way you want to go.
If you want to kick us off.
I move that, so to speak now, correct?
If you hit the yellow thing, you should see the suggested thing to read.
Suggested action.
Yep.
Oh, I see. I should move the whole thing.
And then make a motion to amend the motion. Yeah. Or yeah, move amended. Yeah.
You can move the approval of the amendments to Chapter 13, including that one change that you just noted.
Okay, so I move that we review and adopt amendments to Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act regulations, Chapter 13, utility charges, clarifying certain aspects of the one-time utility adjustment petition process with the amendment just discussed.
Do you want to hit the button? Oh. All right, moved and seconded. So we're going to deliberate on that. Committee Member Balch? Robert seconded. Oh yeah, it was moved by, yes. All right. So, moved by Committee Member Keating, seconded by Committee Member Cox.
And so we are still deliberating, or are we discussing the motion?
Both.
Okay. I'm also going to echo some of the comments, thanking staff for this. I appreciate several of the provisions, and I think the accommodation for inflation on utilities is a very wise thing. I mean, this has been undeniable inflationary pressure that's been very well documented. I might have missed one of the details on how early and by what methods property owners are going to be notified. But if we need more time, as Committeemember Cox said, it is worth considering. Presumably, we are going to be the staff is going to be notifying property owners very early, and that this will be a fairly high-profile decision, because this is a one-time change. So this is not going to be revisited. There's one opportunity to make these adjustments. So I think everyone's going to have a lot of eyes on this. So otherwise, I'm supportive, and I'll yield.
To provide a little bit of insight and background to Committee Member Balch's question or statement, outreach has already started. All property owners have already received multiple communications from our office regarding this, and we will continue to do so, and more so as the process rolls out.
Thank you very much.
Committee Member Keating.
Thank you. I think I'd like to start with a question to staff. So from Speaker Anil, we got our question. I want to see if I am understanding that. So I believe the question was, if there was an AGA applied right before the one-time process, utility increase process kicked off. So then I think we'd be looking at that landlord for that unit continuing RUBS for a year for that unit.
Correct.
Okay. And do we have we had any landlord feedback that continuing RUBS for some units and not others is a difficulty?
We have not.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and to further clarify, for people that have, for units that have moved in after March 1st, this blend of RUBS, no RUBS has already started.
All right. Thank you. Does the committee have any further comments or discussion before we vote on the motion? All right. I think it is time for a roll call vote.
Committee Member Balch.
Yes.
Committee Member Keating.
Yes.
Committee Member Cox.
Yes.
Vice Chair Ma.
Aye.
Chair Brown.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Excellent. All right, we will now move to agenda item 6.3, appeal hearings of the Rental Housing Committee. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. We invite you to submit a speaker card now if you know you would like to speak on this item during public comment. We will begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you, Chair Brown. And I would actually, if it's all right, through the chair, like to do this a little bit differently since this is a training. I think that it makes more sense to pause after each section and maybe take questions. And there are some examples in here, maybe talk those through. I think that would be maybe more productive as a training way to do a training than just me talking at you.
I think that sounds like fun. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. So The purpose of this item is to receive a training on appeals of hearing officers' decisions and individual rent adjustment petitions. And you might be thinking, Nods, didn't we already do one of these? Yes, most of you did do one of these last year. But we felt like with the increase in the number of appeals that are coming through, as well as the complexity of some of them, it would help to do a review of this and maybe do a little bit more of an in-depth hands-on training as to how you should be reviewing the appeal record in order to prepare for the hearings that are coming before you. So that is sort of what has prompted this additional training on appeals. So an overview of how we'll go through this training. I'm going to talk a little bit about the procedure. It's nothing you haven't seen before. It's part of what we talk about before each appeal hearing, but just go through it quickly again. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose of an appeal, and then we will get into the good stuff, which is your role, talking a little bit more in depth about the substantial evidence standard that we reference all the time, but I don't think that we've necessarily discussed thoroughly, and then talking about preparing for appeal hearings. So the procedure, basically the steps before and after it comes to you all. It starts with a petition being filed by a landlord or a tenant, and then a hearing is held on that petition. The hearing officer determines the decision, which staff then sends out to all of the affected parties. And then any party to the hearing officer's decision may appeal to the Rental Housing Committee. So regardless of who initiated the process, any party who's unhappy with the outcome of the hearing and the hearing officer's decision may appeal to the Rental Housing Committee. Staff then reviews the request for the appeal and drafts a tentative appeal decision. That tentative appeal decision goes out again to the parties as well as to you all, along with the administrative or the hearing record for the petition. Then it comes to you all, you deliberate, and you decide after the hearing and opportunity for oral argument by the parties. And then if someone is unhappy with the decision that you all come to, they can appeal it to the state court, the Superior Court, via a writ. So that is the procedure. So you've seen this before, and tonight we're focusing on the area that is in red here, and the very different possibilities of how you can decide an appeal and how you reach your decision on an appeal. Next slide, please. All right, so the purpose of an appeal, what is being appealed is the hearing officer's decision on a petition for individual rent adjustment. And there are multiple types of petitions for an individual upward adjustment. There's a fair return petition or a capital improvement petition, which is essentially a more streamlined version of the fair return petition that focuses on a specific capital improvement that's being made at a property. And then an individual downward adjustment petitions, there's unlawful rent, failure to maintain habitable premises, a decrease in housing services or maintenance, or a tenant hardship petition. And tenant hardship petitions can be filed in response to either a banked rent increase or a fair return petition. So the role of the Rental Housing Committee. So on appeal, the committee, as you know, you all either affirm, reverse, or modify the decision of the hearing officer. And in most cases, the decision will be based on the hearing record, and the committee will not hear or find facts in addition to those presented to the hearing officer. slide. However, you do have options, and I'll pause after this to ask if you have any questions about these different options. So the your options as it relates to the actual hearing on the appeal is to do a closed record, which is typically what is recommended by staff, and that would be deciding based only on the facts and the decision that are written by the hearing officer. The other option is to have an open record, and that would require a de novo hearing, which means that you would essentially follow the formal process that the hearing officer has already followed in order to accept new facts before reaching your decision. And then the final option is a remand, which is a hearing that follows closed record procedures, but the Rental Housing Committee can identify issues for the hearing officer to re-examine, including potentially accepting new facts. So essentially, you would decide based on only the facts in your decision, in the hearing officer's decision. But if you felt that certain aspects just didn't have enough information, or something was unclear about the legal standard, then you could remand to the hearing officer to re-examine that issue. All right, pausing here. Oh, I guess we can go through the whole role of the RHC section. That might make more sense. So we can go to. So as I mentioned, staff will typically not recommend a de novo hearing. This is because it requires a significant amount of time to prepare. And usually the existing evidence in the record is sufficient. And typically the existing record already demonstrates adequate review and ample opportunities for the parties to present relevant evidence. One situation where staff might recommend a de novo hearing is if there wasn't some sort of opportunity for the parties to present their relevant evidence. So if one of the parties appealed on the basis that for some reason they were denied the ability to present certain evidence or to testify, so on and so forth, that might be a reason for a de novo hearing, but typically staff will not recommend it. So as it relates to questions of law, these are questions of statutory interpretation. You do exercise your judgment independent of the hearing officer. So this gets a little bit confusing because this is also called something de novo, but it's a de novo review instead of a de novo hearing. And so you're basically reviewing the questions of the law through an unfiltered, unaffected lens, and not considering what the hearing officer decided was the correct law to apply. So you're making that decision independent of the hearing officer's determination of the law. So some examples of questions of law, for instance, what standard is applicable to the habitability issue? So as you'll remember, one of the ones that came up was, what's the correct temperature or standard for hot water in a residential unit? That is a question of law, right? So you're determining what the correct standard is. Other ones that have come up is which set of concessions regulations apply to the concessions in this case. So, there are different sets of concession regulations based on when the concessions were provided. And so there's a determination can be made there of which is the correct set. And lastly, should the hiring officer have allowed certain evidence to be introduced? This is again a question of law as to whether that evidence was relevant, whether it was timely, submitted. That is a question of looking at the law, looking at your regulations, and determining, what is the correct standard for that evidence to be introduced. any questions on this before I go to the next slide?
I don't see any.
Okay, great. All right, next slide. So questions of law are pretty rare, I would say, in these appeals. They do come up occasionally, but what you're going to see and what you have seen more often is questions of fact. And for questions of fact, these are the things that the Rental Housing Committee must determine based on the record, the hearing record. And essentially your role is to determine whether or not each appealed element of the hearing officer's decision is supported by substantial evidence. So you're not reweighing the evidence or relitigating the issues. Reweighing the evidence, means like if the hearing officer determined that one party's testimony was more credible than another party's testimony, then it's not your job to reweigh that that evidence. You're more so looking at, did the hearing officer's determination make sense based on all of the evidence and the record? So you don't have to reach the same conclusion as the hearing officer. You can decide that, no, I don't feel like the evidence in the record was sufficient to support a determination that the landlord received reasonable notice of this condition. So those are the types of questions of fact. Some examples are, was the landlord provided with reasonable notice and an opportunity to cure the habitability issue? Was the condition in question the fault of the tenant? And, that would be like a mitigating circumstance as to whether the landlord was liable for that issue. And then were there circumstances justifying a Vega adjustment? So that would come up in if a fair rate of return determination was appealed. Any questions on this one?
I think we have some, yes. So, Committee Member Cox.
Yes, what is a Vega adjustment?
Oh.
It's just for vegetarians?
You haven't seen one in a long time.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. But basically, when there's a fair rate of return petition, you use a standard called the maintenance of net operating income. And that looks at the base year's net operating income. And in some cases, landlords will say there were extenuating circumstances that made my net operating income in that year particularly low. So it is not indicative of my fair rate of return. So I think that there should be an adjustment to that net operating income to bring it up in order to provide a more accurate base of what my profit, what my net operating income is year over year.
It's named after a case, the Vega case. Yeah. That's how we get it.
Yeah.
Pardon?
But we could, yeah.
No, I think it was the Santa Monica case.
So my question was about the evidence that we have. We get the full record. Are we limited in what is substantial based on what the hearing officer cites for a given finding in the initial findings and or the appeal, the tentative appeal decision?
No, so you are able to look at the entire record to determine whether there was substantial evidence in the record to support the hearing officer's determination. Because they will summarize often, especially when it comes to testimony. And then if you go back and you listen to the hearing record, there's much more detail that's in there that, probably informed their decision that they didn't necessarily include in their summaries. So no, you're not limited by what is actually cited in the decision. You are limited by what is in the actual record.
Thank you. Committee Member Keating.
Thank you. So I'm going to make up an example in order to help better ask my question.
Okay.
So let's say the question revolves around I'm remembering a recent appeal we heard where there was mold in one bedroom. And so there was a loss of use of that bedroom, and there was some fraction of the rent corresponding to that. And so let's say that the hearing officer, did something with number of rooms. And, that was, let's say it was an element of the appeal because perhaps the landlord was saying, oh, this, room was usable still. But then suppose I looked at the photos provided and I said, well, that room isn't really a full room, it's just a closet, so we shouldn't count it as a room, we should count it as half a room. But then I say, but I can see why it is a door you can close into that very small area, so I can see why the hearing officer was reasonable to call it a room, although I would call that half a room, and I would have had a different decrease in the rent. So with that situation, which way are we supposed to decide the appeal? Remand it or accept it because the hearing officer's was reasonable even if it wasn't ours?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and we will talk about some examples like that later. But since the and this is like going to be a really important thing that I focus on in when you look at the appeal record. So if the landlord appealed on the basis that that room was usable, right? That is what is being appealed. They're not appealing on the basis that the size of the room was something. So you're not even supposed to look at the size of the room because that's not the argument that the landlord is making. You are not supposed to basically make the arguments for them. You just decide on the arguments that they are making.
That is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, any more questions on this? All right, I think we're ready for the next slide.
All right, next slide. So this is a little bit more about the substantial evidence standard because I know that it can be tricky. Black Law's dictionary is something that lawyers use to try to make things layman's terms, but we don't do a very good job. Substantial evidence is evidence that a reasonable mind could accept as accurate to support a conclusion, evidence beyond a scintilla. So if there was no substantial evidence to support a decision, then the decision is arbitrary. And so often in the tentative appeal decisions and in the presentations that we give, you will hear me or Karen say a hearing officer erred or abused their discretion, or they did not err or abuse their discretion. And that's sort of what it means for the decision to have been arbitrary, is that the hearing officer either made an error or they abused their discretion because based on the evidence that was in the record, it just was not reasonable for them to reach the conclusion that they did. So substantial evidence based on findings, this is intended to bridge the analytical gap between the raw evidence and the ultimate decision, and facilitate orderly analysis and minimize the likelihood that an agency will randomly leap from evidence to conclusion. So is there a logical, reasonable connection between the evidence that was in the record and the decision that the hearing officer made? So let me give you an extreme example. So let's say that there is evidence in the record that the tenant informed their landlord of an issue on 4 occasions, right? And then in the decision, for some reason, it says the tenant informed their landlord on a daily basis. And so the landlord was provided with sufficient evidence. You'd be like, well, there's nothing in the record to reach that conclusion that the notification was daily, right? So that would be like a random leap from the evidence, the conclusions about whether the landlord received adequate or sufficient notice of an issue. And then The last idea of the substantial evidence is to serve a public relations function by helping to persuade the parties that administrative decision making is careful, reasonable, and equitable. This is all language from a court case that was decided, that's cited down here. If you are so inclined to go and read it, it is available on Google. You don't need like access to Lexis or anything like that, but it might help to explain a little bit better what the substantial evidence standard is as applicable to decisions of administrative agencies. So any questions on that standard?
So would a contrast to substantial evidence be like anecdotal or circumstantial evidence? Or are those unrelated?
No, those are unrelated, I would say, because oftentimes there is circumstantial evidence that's cited, and there's a sufficient amount of it in order to create a picture of what has happened. And so it wouldn't necessarily be unreasonable for a hearing officer to draw conclusions based on that. This is more so about like, is the amount and quality of the evidence in the record sufficient to convince you, a reasonable person, that the story that the hearing officer has painted and concluded is more likely than not the accurate story of what has happened. I don't know if Karen has better ways of saying this. Try to put these in like the most.
Yeah, no, that was. I agree with Naz's description.
Explaining things to us lay people seems painful. Vice Chair Ma.
So to clarify on the slide before, the RHC does not have to reach the same conclusions as the hearing officer. That just means as long as the hearing officer does not look completely arbitrary, they're fine. That is not something that the RHC needs to touch. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
Right. Any more questions?
Right.
All right.
Cool. Let's get into the scope of the decision. So you've seen this slide before, but as we've discussed before, the petition defines the scope of the hearing officer's decision, while the appeal request limits the scope of the Rental Housing Committee's review on appeal. What does this mean? Next slide. So the scope of the appeal is defined by the appellant. So the party that appeals the decision is the one who decides what are the elements that the Rental Housing Committee is going to have to look at. Only issues raised in the appeal are to be decided by the Rental Housing Committee unless an issue could not have been raised. But, this goes back to the question that Committee Member Keating just asked of, well, can we look at this other thing, this other consideration about the room size and whether or not it was reasonable for the hearing officer to conclude that that was, a whole room, only if that is an argument that is brought up in the appeal by the appellant. You have to stick to the arguments that they are making and assess those. So an example, in a landlord fair rate of return petition, goes back to the Vega adjustments, but a hearing officer grants a Vega adjustment and a rent increase. And if the landlord appeals the amount of the rent increase, but not the Vega adjustment, then the Rental Housing Committee has to accept the Vega adjustment from the hearing officer's decision and only deliberate the rent increase. Similarly, for a habitability petition, let's say that the hearing officer grants a downward adjustment of rent of $100 a month for a cockroach infestation. If the landlord appeals on the basis that there was insufficient evidence in the record to demonstrate reasonable notice was provided by the tenant, then the rental housing committee may only decide whether there is sufficient evidence in the record of the tenant's notice, not whether the amount of the reduction was reasonable. So let's say in that case, you conclude, no, we do think that there was sufficient evidence in the record that the tenant did notify the hearing officer, did notify the landlord, then every other aspect of this decision related to this habitability issue should remain untouched by you because it's not being appealed. All right, any questions about this?
I've got a question for that. So does that encourage kind of a shotgun approach to just appeal as many things as possible in case one of them might get through?
Yeah, I mean, it might. I don't think that we've really seen that. The appeals that we've seen have been pretty limited to certain issues. I mean, people will generally sometimes make more general statements and say, you know, there was just insufficient evidence in the record to conclude that that the tenant basically met all of the requirements or met their burden of proof generally as to each condition. And in that case, we would have to go through one by one each aspect of that is determined by the hearing officer if they make a more general statement of like, just generally this was all wrong as to this condition.
Right. And they are in their appeals supposed to support the issue, so that kind of discourages just randomly, not always, but if they just put out an issue but they don't have any support for why it's a problem, then typically that gets dismissed pretty quickly.
All right, thank you. I think we've got Committee Member Keating.
I'm just curious if there have been situations where a tenant at a property appeals on, let's say, either habitability or rent calculation, and then subsequent tenants have become informed and submitted their own similar appeals?
You mean petitions?
Petitions, yes, thank you.
Staff might know better than I do if that has happened in the past.
My apologies, Committee Member Keating. Can you repeat the question?
I'm curious if we've had at a property, first one tenant files a petition, and then because of public awareness of that petition, we've had subsequent petitions.
We have had situations where that has occurred.
Thank you.
Committee Member Cox.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, like, one of the frustrations that I've had, you know, in listening to the appeals is that many times when we have this thing, well, you have 10 minutes to talk and the next person has 10 minutes to talk and then 5 minutes to rebut and whatever. I hear a lot of talk about things that are not pertinent to the appeals. And I'm just wondering whether staff or anybody gives guidance to the people before the hearing about, you know, you should stick to what's in the appeal. Or is...
Staff does provide, well, two things. First, I wanted to clarify that for Committee Member Keating's question and my comment, we have seen at different properties where one tenant has filed a petition, another tenant file a petition during that same process because they're aware of it, not necessarily related to the appeal process at all. So I do just want to make sure that I give the most accurate answer there. For your question, Committee Member Cox, we do provide information and education to everyone during the petition process, including what the appeal process looks like. And they receive information sheets that have all the information that they could, you know, kind of possibly want as well. We are looking at and considering perhaps doing like appeal workshops or providing a little bit more information and support for that process to help reduce even more than the conversations that we currently have with the parties involved in the appeal. What we have seen, though, I mean, anecdotally from staff's experience, is that regardless of the information that we provide on, this is not in the original record, you can't continue with this portion of this appeal, or you should consider not continuing with this portion of this appeal. Often that is the recommendation and consideration from staff may not be taken into account by the appellant.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the recording of tonight's meeting and this section be something we could provide to prospective appellants so that they can see what the process looks like and what we have seen about the process?
One potential option is for staff to record another a presentation similar to this as a workshop and provide that for potential appellants as well. We can definitely look at cutting the recording down for this evening's committee meeting, edit it to just specifically this item number as well. And we can also look at taking these slides and providing them on the website for the public to have access to.
I think that sounds great. All right, any further questions about this item? Nope. All right, let's keep going.
Cool. So these are just some more more considerations as it relates to the scope of a decision. One thing I think is important to watch out for is just irrelevant or red herring arguments. So one example is the amount of the market rent or how much a tenant household earns is often irrelevant to the fair rate of return petition based on a maintenance of net operating income. Again, how much, what the fair market rent is for a unit is not relevant to whether or not the landlord is able to maintain their net operating income from the base year forward. So it is an argument that people try to make on appeal, but it's not actually relevant. Another one that I think we saw recently was a landlord's characterization that providing a housing service as a courtesy to their tenants should be a consideration, and that would not count as a reduction in housing services or elimination housing services. That's really not relevant if a landlord is providing a service for a housing service for whatever reason at the beginning of the tenancy. That continues to be included in the tenant's rent moving forward. And so the elimination of that housing service, whether it's laundry, whether it's pool, whether it's landscaping, whether or not their reason was for courtesy or whatever it is not actually relevant to whether it constitutes a rent reduction. And then lastly, the fact that the landlord just purchased the property is rarely, if ever, relevant to whether the landlord is liable for the issue raised in the downward adjustment petition. So again, this is an issue that has come up a few times, but based on the definitions in the CSFRA, a landlord is defined to include the predecessor of the current owner. And so landlords continue to be liable, and a lot of people think that this is unfair, but there is a duty to do your due diligence when you're purchasing a property, to determine what the conditions are each of the units. That's why landlords or prospective buyers of multifamily units are allowed to inspect each unit. And so really it's up to the landlord at the time that they're purchasing the property to determine whether the rents have been properly increased, whether the conditions on the property have been properly addressed, whether housing services are aligned with leases. So for the most part, that argument is not going to be relevant in an appeal. Any questions on this one?
No, I think we're good.
Great. All right. So continuing on with the scope of the decision, so you can, for each issue that is appealed, make a different determination on it. So, you can affirm, modify, reverse, or remand each of the appealed elements differently. And I'll just focus on the first example here, which is an unlawful rent petition. But let's say that there was a petition based on unlawful rent because the landlord failed to roll back rent, and because they started charging utility charges at some time, or separately billing utility charges at some time during the tenancy. The hearing officer concludes that, that they did in fact fail to roll back the rent, calculates the correct base rent, and then also determines that, that they did start charging utilities at some time during the tenancy separately. You all, after looking at the hearing record, decide, okay, we agree and we affirm that there is sufficient evidence in the record to demonstrate that the landlord failed to roll back the rent. So we affirm that piece of the hearing officer's decision. And to be clear, I'm assuming that each of these things was appealed. And then the landlord also appealed on the basis that the calculation of the base rent was incorrect. And so you look at it and you're like, oh, that was probably some sort of incorrect calculation, clerical error. So you modify that aspect of the hearing officer's decision to correct the base rent calculation. And then when it comes to the utility charges, you look at the evidence in the record and it's not really clear when those utility charges started or how much they were charged. And so you remand for more information, the collection of more information about those utility charges, and for the hearing officer to make an updated decision based on that remand. So this is just to let you know that, you can decide each aspect differently. It does not all have to be an affirm or a deny or, a remand. Any questions on this? Being one.
We do actually have a question, Vice Chair Ma.
Yes, my question is on the reverse, because how does a reverse work? And has the RC ever actually done that before?
So reverse would be where you decide that there was not substantial evidence in the record to support the hearing officer's decision. So let's say that we go back to this cockroach infestation and the landlord raises the issue of whether or not the tenant properly notified them and gave them sufficient time to address the issue. And you, as the rental housing committee, look at the record for the hearing and you say, no, we don't think the tenant actually, the tenant really only gave them 3 days to address this very severe cockroach issue. To us, that doesn't seem like that's accurate. And so essentially you reverse the hearing officer's decision and you reach the opposite conclusion, which is that the tenant has not met their burden of proof on that condition and that they are not entitled to any rent reduction.
Okay, but has the RC ever done that action before?
That I don't know.
There have been decisions, mainly when issues have come up, when there have been questions about the hearing officer's decision, we have recommended remand. Yeah. But I do believe there have been a few instances where the RHC has changed the decision.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure I'd call it a reversal, but they have altered aspects of the decision.
I can't recall a reversal, but I do recall that there were a few that had modifications, but it's been quite a while since we've had that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an attestation to the quality of your hearing officers that you don't see more reversals, because they do a good job of supporting their conclusions in the decision with the evidence in the record. and they're very fair. So, yeah.
All right.
All right. Next slide. All right. So preparing for an appeal hearing. So you don't have to follow these steps if you don't want to. This is my process when I am looking at the appeal. And I find that it helps me in drafting the tentative appeal decisions to really focus in and hone in on the issues that are raised in the appeal to do it this way. You might have a different process, but I just wanted to walk you through what I think is the best practice and what I think might help um, you all in limiting and sort of narrowing your focus on the questions that are actually raised in the appeal and sort of, um, you know, uh, shutting out all of the additional information on irrelevant things that, as committee member Cox mentioned, tend to come up in these appeals. Um, so, and I don't know if it's super helpful to, I can't share my screen. Okay. I might, after the first step, share my screen to show an appeal request, just so you know what the form looks like and you're able to familiarize with these after each of these steps, actually, I think, in order to sort of help you. So my first step, and it might seem a little bit backwards, is to review the appeal request first before I look at anything else. I don't look at the hearing officer's decision. I don't look at the hearing record. I look first at the appeal request in order to establish the elements of the decision that are being appealed. So I basically just make a chart and I say, okay, issue number 1 is this, issue number 2 is this, issue number 3 that is raised is this. And I, say very specifically what the arguments are. And let me go ahead and show you the form. They're often not very detailed. So, sometimes it's a very short argument as to each one, but I think I should be able to do this over. Give me 1 second. Are you all able to see this? Should I make it bigger?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, great.
Actually, could you zoom in a little bit?
Yes, I can. All right. So this is an appeal request for an appeal that you already heard, but I just wanted to show you what the form looks like. So when you're looking through the record, you're like, what document am I looking for in the appeal? So this will have just the information about the address, the landlord's information, and then you get to this section, which outlines their reasons for the appeal. And so, as I said, my first step is to...
I think we have a request to...
Could you just pause for a minute to let us?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right there.
Right here.
If you wouldn't mind, would you just read to us 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5?
Yeah, absolutely. I was definitely going to do that. Okay, so here, as you'll see, there are 5 reasons. This is one where they numbered it. So you got lucky. Sometimes they will not number it. But so there's five reasons for the appeal. The first is that the hearing officer unjustly omitted certain information from the record that they submitted. And they specifically indicate what that excluded evidence was. And they explain that despite their attempts to address these issues during the hearing, time constraints prevented a thorough clarification. And so they submitted a letter in response to the hearing officer's request for additional statements. So that's their argument for why they submitted this clarification evidence letter. The second is that the requested evidence was not received. And so again, this was a document that the hearing officer requested, but their staff, they say that their reason for not sending it is that their staff overlooked sending it, and they included that document in the current appeal file. So basically, they're asking that both of these documents be included in the hearing record. Number 3, they contend that the ruling on page 16, line 26, regarding the denial of the 2016 annual general adjustment of 3.6% for the maximum permissible amounts for the unit is subjective, unfair, and unreasonable. Number 4, they strongly dispute the statement of order number 1, page 25, line 11, alleging that the respondent and its predecessor violated the CSFRA by demanding and accepting rent for the unit. And they say that as the current owner, we have never requested an increase in rent or additional charges for the property. While the actions mentioned may have occurred under the previous owner's management, we were unaware of the issue, and the previous owner's manager has asserted the lack of knowledge about the matter. And then 5, we also challenged the ruling of number 10 on page 26, line 22, as we have already provided a clear response on page 12, line 25 to page 13, line 6. This one's a little bit of a cross-referencing. You got to go look at the hearing officer's decision. But cheat code is that in the 10, and let me know if you need me to make this bigger. If you're confused after reading, because as you'll see, there's not very much detail in the appeal requests about, what on the grounds on which they are appealing. And so you're like, what are they talking about? Or I'm having trouble with these cross references, the page numbers and lines and stuff. In the tentative appeal decision, which you also receive, if you scroll down to section, it's always going to be section 3, it will outline for you the appealed elements of the hearing officer's decision. And so this basically summarizes their arguments as to each of the things that we just reviewed. Summarizes, the argument that they're making, as well as any support that they provided for that argument. And sometimes, as you see in this one, it was something as simple as them saying it's subjective, unfair, and unreasonable. There's not much more detail than that. So that is always my first step, is to look at the appeal request. And then after I look at the appeal request, then I turn to the hearing officer's decision, which looks like it'll have a page like this, and it'll be titled Notice of Hearing Officer Written Decision. I'll give you a second to take that in. And then the hearing officers, each, depending on who it is, have a little bit of a different style and, way of drafting their decisions. But after, as I said, after I look at the landlord request and I kind of make this little chart for myself, I then go through the hearing officer's decision and I make basically a second column in my chart that is, okay, what are the arguments or the information that was in the hearing officer's decision to support each of these things that had come up? And so that really helps you focus in on the issues that are being raised and the evidence in the hearing officer's decision that is outlined, or their explanation for it. So you might have to read through the whole decision, but it'll sort of help you weed out what is relevant and what is not to their determination. Okay, and then I'm gonna stop sharing.
And I think we have a question for you.
Oh, okay, go for it.
Vice Chair Ma?
Okay, yeah, so as we mentioned before about dismissal, is there ever a case where, besides a procedural failure, can staff actually dismiss a petition before it gets to the RC? Appeal, yes.
An appeal?
Well, staff does not accept incomplete petitions.
Okay. But as long as they're, procedurally correct, it has words, but it might not have, as we just saw in the last one, it did not give extra evidence of why it thinks its appeal was.
So you mean on an appeal that we would not accept an appeal?
Yes.
No, we would always accept an appeal. It's part of the due process rights.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
If we do get an appeal request after the deadline for appeal, then that is brought to you to consider whether or not to accept the appeal request moving forward in the appeal process. We don't even deny late appeals from the process.
Okay, hypothetically, if someone were to appeal a petition and all of the points raised in the appeal were immaterial or would not result in any change in the outcomes, like
we would outline that in the tentative appeal decision and then present it to you and you would decide on it. Staff does not have the authority to decide appeal.
All right.
Yeah. So it'll have to come to you regardless, even if we think it, lacks evidence to support it. All right. So after reviewing the hearing officer's decision, I look at the complete hearing record in case, as I mentioned, there is anything in the hearing record that the hearing officer didn't necessarily summarize. And so that's sort of like my third column in my chart. My first column, as I said, is the issues that are raised in the appeal. The second one is the hearing officer's evidence that's cited, and then I look through the entire record and I say, okay, there's actually this additional information that the hearing officer didn't even mention that supports their decision or does not support their decision, right? And then I go back and review the appeal request again just to make sure that I understand, what the issues are that are being raised. And then finally, I don't do this. I don't review the tentative appeal decision because I'm drafting it. But to you all, I would recommend reviewing the tentative appeal decision to determine whether you agree with the conclusions that staff's draft has reached regarding the appealed elements of the hearing officer's decision. So basically, look through your own notes, your own chart, and say, okay, staff is saying, yes, there's sufficient evidence in the record to support the hearing officer's decision on X, Y, and Z. I'm looking at my own chart and yeah, I agree that there is actually sufficient evidence, or no, I don't agree with that determination by staff. And so when it comes time for the appeal decision, or the appeal hearing rather, you have a better sense of how you might vote already. Of course, things can be raised at the hearing. So that is one thing that I will mention. And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's possible that the appellant may not, in their appeal request, include very much detail and may instead in their oral argument raise many of these issues, or may raise more detail about why they are making the argument that they're making. And certainly that would be a reason to make a different determination than necessarily what is in the tentative appeal decision. yeah, that is the end of the presentation. Happy to take any additional questions.
All right.
You just muted yourself.
Oh,
Yep.
sorry.
Are there any additional
Go
questions from the committee? We've had a lot of opportunity to ask so far. All right. So I think that we are going to open this up to public comment. So if anyone has public comment, has submitted a card, otherwise please raise your hand or press *9. All right. Seeing no people wishing to speak, we can move on to deliberations and feedback. Does the committee have any comments, deliberations, feedback for staff and council?
I just want to say thank you, Nas. That's why we love having you.
Yes.
Very thorough presentation.
Strongly agree. Yeah. Looking forward to the next appeal where I get to put all this into practice.
You might regret saying that.
Oh. So you think I don't enjoy suffering? All right. I believe it is time to move on to committee staff announcements and updates.
Oh, no.
Okay, thank you, committee. So we'll begin with upcoming workshops and help center dates, agenda item 7.1. And first, we'll look at our upcoming office hours, workshops, and a big event that we have coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we, of course, are keeping on the schedule for our virtual office hours that are happening every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. over Zoom. We also have some workshops coming up. So there is a June 13th workshop that had already been advertised and on the books before we scheduled our special meeting for the Rental Housing Committee, but that workshop will still be happening. And it is hybrid. It will be online over Zoom and at 298 Escuela. And it will be looking at sort of the basics of the rent stabilization programs at 6:30 p.m. And then next on June 18th, we have 2 workshops, one at 2 p.m. and we'll talk more in detail about utility adjustment petitions for landlords. That one is going to be only held over Zoom, and it is focused towards the landlords. And then at 6:30 p.m., we have a tenant-focused workshop for changes in utility billing, and that is hybrid. It will be virtual over Zoom and also in the Plaza Conference Room. And then our big event we are holding is on June 8th. It is our 3rd annual community summer kickoff from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. That is at Rengsdorf Park.
And I would like to ask if anyone wants to volunteer to become a judge for the chalk contest that day.
Any volunteers? All right. That sounds like fun.
It is a lot of fun.
Are there going to be balloon animals?
There will be balloon animals.
What about face paint?
No, but we will have people dressed as Mickey and Minnie, and you can take pictures with them.
Can people come with their own faces painted?
Sure.
All right.
It should be a ton of fun. So we're hoping to see a lot of the community out there. We have about 27 organizations that have RSVP'd to table and pass out information. So it should be a bit bigger than last year. So we're very excited.
Yeah, I saw the flyer for it. Wish it were on the slides so we could show it to everyone.
We'll add it for the. Well, we'll be over, but you can see what it looked like. We'll add some pictures as well. Oh, Patricia can pull it up.
Can you tell I'm excited for the balloon animals?
Yeah, I think we all are, really.
How's staff's chalk art? Good?
It's for children.
I mean, we're all someone's children.
That is true. You can make chalk art if you like.
Chair?
Oh, I thought we were gonna get the
Oh,
Yeah, we are.
flyer. Yeah, I was just trying to fill time. Oh, did you? Please.
There we
You
go.
didn't hit the button. Committee Member Keating.
I'm not sure how close we are to ending, but before we ended, I just wanted to ask Committee Member Balch how late it is where they are and say thank you for staying up. He's gone, so I missed that opportunity.
I think he might have fallen asleep. All right, let's see the flyer.
So this is the flyer here. You'll see some of the events. We have a pop-up art class, the balloon animals, some raffles. We've had some really generous donations for the raffles from local businesses down on Castro Street, so we're very excited about that. And then a few of our community partners are listed there, but there'll be many, many more.
I also want to commend our staff because everything we put out is designed by our own staff.
I think it's gorgeous. Yeah.
All right. So, of course, we cannot leave without mentioning our housing help centers. So we have our landlord housing help centers that keep going strong, and they, as word is getting out, they're actually very well attended and very busy for us. And those are still on the first and third Thursdays of every month at our office, 298 Escuela, and also virtually on Zoom, where we offer a lot of information about rent stabilization in general, eviction protections, property registration and the annual fees, compliance questions, and then more increasingly some petition questions, especially about the utilities. And then, of course, the same days, we have our tenant help center. So that's first and third Thursdays in the evenings from 6 to 8, both in person and on Zoom. And at the Tenant Help Center, we also have some community organizations such as CSA and CLUSPA who also staff that help center. So we give general information about housing programs throughout the city, eviction help, legal resources, and other support services such as food distribution, financial assistance, mediation, and different types of homelessness prevention services.
And Andrea, just before we move on to the next slide, the Landlord Housing Help Center reminded me of something I did want to share with the committee, which is we had our first MNOI petition filed with the city this month, the first one in a little bit. So I just wanted to mention that it actually came out of the efforts from registration and compliance from last year. So yeah, just wanted to note that since we didn't go over the status report.
All right. Awesome. It shows things are working. I appreciate all the outreach that staff does for the city, just in so many ways. All right, item 7.2, future agenda items for RHC meetings. So we're looking forward to an appeal hearing where we get to practice everything we learned tonight. I think this is missing June 13th. We have a special meeting where we are going to adopt fiscal year 2024-25 Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act and Mobile Home Rent Stabilization budget, including the contract renewal with Goldfarb and Lippman LLP for fiscal year 2024-25 and the contract renewal with Project Sentinel for fiscal year 2024-25. So I believe those are going to happen at the special meeting on June 13th. And then on Thursday, June 27th, we are going to have an appeal hearing and other items. Any additional comments or announcements from committee members or staff? All right. Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned at 10:04. The next Rental Housing Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on Thursday, June 13th, 2024 at 7 p.m. All right. Thanks, everybody. Wait.